It was just another busy Friday night at Velvet Ember, the kind of place where chandeliers flickered softly overhead and the scent of garlic butter drifted from the kitchen in waves. The piano in the corner played slow jazz, and wine glasses clinked gently over hushed conversations. The dining room buzzed with luxury, reserved only for those who could afford its price and its attitude. Jasmine Carter, 24, maneuvered through the tables with effortless grace, her long black hair tied back in a neat bun. Her apron was crisp, and her steps were quick. She didn't have the luxury of mistakes. Every hour, she worked meant a little more help for her mother's piling hospital bills. She had been working at Velvet Ember for 3 weeks. It wasn't easy blending into a place where the staff whispered about designer watches and private flights. But Jasmine wasn't there to fit in. She was there to survive. And then they arrived. Preston Maxwell waltzed into the restaurant like he owned it, which, rumor had it, he almost did. Clad in an expensive gray suit that probably cost more than Jasmine's entire college tuition, Preston was the embodiment of old money and unchecked arrogance. With him were 3 other men, just as polished and smug, the type who laughed too loudly and tipped too little. They didn't request a table. They commanded one. Jasmine saw their names flash on the seating chart and braced herself. She knew who Preston was. Everybody did. He was infamous for his cruelty masked as charm, for turning staff into the evening's entertainment with one-liner insults and showy power plays. But she didn't expect his focus to turn to her so fast. She approached with menus in hand, offering a practiced smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I get you started with some drinks?" Preston leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as they scanned her face, then her hands, then her entire frame, like she was some curious creature he hadn't seen before. Then, with a crooked smirk, he said, "You look like someone who plays jazz in a smoky bar." The statement hung in the air like a trap. His friends chuckled under their breath, sensing something was coming. "Why don't you play us something on that grand piano over there?" he added, gesturing toward the elegant black piano near the bar with a mocking flourish. His voice was slick with sarcasm, not curiosity. He wasn't inviting her to impress. He was setting her up to fail. The room, which had been busy with chatter just moments before, began to quiet. A few heads turned. Even the pianist, mid-song, eased off the keys to observe. Jasmine froze. For a second, she thought she hadn't heard him right. But Preston wasn't done. "What? Don't tell me you're shy," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You've got the look. All that's missing is the smoke and a drink in your hand." His friends laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was safe. Jasmine's chest tightened. She could feel the burn in her ears, the pressure behind her eyes. Her grip on the menus tightened as the heat of humiliation flushed through her. She could have walked away. She could have ignored him. But then she looked up and locked eyes with him. And in that moment, she saw it clearly. He didn't expect her to fight back. He expected her to shrink. That's when something inside her, something deep, snapped. She exhaled slowly and placed the menus gently on the table. "Sure," she said quietly. "I'll play." Jasmine looked at the piano, its glossy black surface gleaming under the golden lights like it was waiting, challenging her. Her eyes traced the familiar shape of the keys, each one echoing memories she hadn't touched in years. Then she turned her gaze back to Preston. He was reclined in his chair, legs crossed, arms spread wide, like a king waiting to be entertained. His smirk deepened the longer she remained silent, as if every second she hesitated confirmed the picture he had already painted of her. Weak, small, laughable. Jasmine stood frozen for a moment. A single heartbeat stretched into an eternity. She wasn't hired to perform. She was a waitress. Her job was to serve food, smile politely, and make sure the guests never had to lift a finger, not to be dragged into the middle of some rich man's game for amusement. But there was something in Preston's eyes that pierced her soul. It wasn't just arrogance. It was entitlement, superiority, and yes, racism cloaked in the form of a backhanded dare. She gave a tight, polite smile. "I don't play in public," she replied quietly, trying to keep her voice steady, respectful. Preston tilted his head dramatically. "Really?" he said with exaggerated surprise, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "That's a shame." You really look like the type who'd know her way around Jazz. Come on, don't be shy. Jasmine took a half step back. Her chest tightened. Why was he pushing this? Then he said it. Come on. Humor us. Preston leaned forward, pulling out his wallet like he was about to tip a street performer. I'll give you $500. Unless you're scared. That word, scared, hit like a slap. Several heads turned. A few people even gasped, catching the clear tone of insult hidden behind his grin. The room was shifting. What had started as a casual dining experience was morphing into a public spectacle. Even her fellow servers paused in motion. The hostess near the front froze mid-step. Somewhere, someone began recording. It wasn't just about a piano anymore. It was about power. Jasmine's stomach twisted. $500 could cover 2 months of her mother's medication. Rent was already overdue. Her car had a warning light blinking on the dash. She needed the money. Every part of her was screaming to walk away, to avoid the humiliation. But then, something else sparked. It wasn't just pride. It was her dignity. She had been made to feel small too many times in her life. Always working harder. Always being talked over. Always trying to blend in. And now this man, this stranger, was trying to turn her into the punchline of his evening? Her fists clenched at her sides. She could feel her pulse in her ears, but her expression didn't change. She took a slow breath, steadying the storm inside her. Then she stepped forward and said calmly, clearly, I'll play. Preston leaned back, satisfied, but something flickered in his expression, a crack in his confidence. He hadn't expected her to accept. Gasps turned into murmurs. Forks clinked onto plates. The pianist in the corner stopped playing entirely. Every eye in the restaurant followed Jasmine as she made her way to the piano, her steps even, her back straight, her heart pounding like a war drum. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't his moment anymore. It was hers. The moment Jasmine turned away from Preston's table, the mood in Velvet Ember shifted like the tide retreating from shore. The clatter of cutlery stopped. Conversations faded into silence. Even the jazz trio, who had been playing up to that moment, instinctively quieted, their instruments falling still mid-note. Something about the way Jasmine walked, controlled, graceful, yet electric, hinted that what was about to happen wasn't ordinary. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She simply made her way to the grand piano in the far corner of the room, the soft hum of anticipation building behind her with each step. Jasmine had played this exact model before, back when she was 16, barefoot in her grandmother's church, where the piano sat in a dusty corner beside the choir pews. That memory flickered in her mind now as she lowered herself onto the bench, her hands trembling slightly above the keys. She stared at them for a moment. So many years had passed. So many detours. So much silence. She inhaled, held it, then released. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out like a whisper into a sleeping world. At first it was soft, delicate, a melody so fragile it felt like it might float away. But it didn't. It held. It expanded. It deepened. The chords built slowly, like brushstrokes on a blank canvas. Then, without warning, her hands danced. The room came alive with music. Not just any music. Her soul. She poured into those keys everything she had never said out loud. The sorrow of watching her mother struggle for breath in a hospital bed. The nights she cried herself to sleep while working double shifts. The exhaustion of pretending she wasn't hurting. All of it found voice in her fingertips. The melody curled into a rich jazz progression, then glided into deep blues, aching raw. From there it rose again, like sunlight breaking through clouds, laced with gospel influences and classical precision. Her left hand thundered while her right hand wept. The contrast was stunning. People at tables turned their full bodies toward her. Phones were lowered. Wine glasses held midair untouched. A woman near the window had tears welling in her eyes. The man beside her mouthed, "Wow." Even the chef, usually glued to the heat of the kitchen, stood in the doorway in his flour-stained apron, arms crossed, utterly still. And Preston? His arrogant smirk had vanished. Now he leaned forward in his seat, brows furrowed, not with amusement, but disbelief. This wasn't a waitress fumbling through a party trick. This was a maestro commanding the room. Each note Jasmine struck rewrote the narrative Preston had tried to force on her. The girl he wanted to humiliate had just turned the entire restaurant into her audience, and she had no mic, no spotlight, and no backup. Just a piano, her pain, and a room full of people finally listening. Minutes passed. 5, 6, 7. When the final note echoed out like a prayer answered, she let it ring into the silence. Then nothing. No applause. No whispers. No movement. Just stunned silence. Jasmine sat there, chest rising and falling with each deep breath. She didn't look at anyone. Didn't speak. She simply placed her hands in her lap and stood slowly. She turned back to the restaurant. Dozens of eyes met hers. And then it came. Applause. First from a couple in the back. Then another table. Then another. Soon, the entire restaurant erupted in clapping, cheering, even whistles. A woman stood up and shouted, "Encore!" But Jasmine just smiled gently. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to remind them. She wasn't a side act. She was the main event. When the final note faded into the air, it was as if the entire room forgot how to breathe. The vibrations from the piano still hovered like invisible threads, lingering in the golden light. Jasmine didn't move right away. Her fingers rested gently on the keys for one last moment, like she was saying goodbye to a part of herself that had waited too long to be seen. She exhaled, then lifted her hands, and rose. Slowly, gracefully, she stood from the bench and turned to face the crowd. Still silence. Mouths slightly open. Faces frozen. Some with tears on their cheeks, others blinking rapidly as if trying to process what they had just witnessed. And then, crack! The first applause broke the stillness like a firework. A woman near the front stood up, clapping with both hands as tears streamed freely down her face. "My God," she whispered. Others followed, one by one, then all at once. The quiet restaurant exploded into a roaring ovation. Chairs scraped back as people stood. Napkins were left crumpled on tables. Even the chefs from the kitchen emerged, white coats and all, joining the applause with wide-eyed awe. A man near the bar had his phone raised, capturing what was quickly becoming a moment no one would forget. The jazz band, who had paused their set when Jasmine began playing, clapped louder than anyone. One of the musicians even gave her a small bow of respect. In the middle of it all, Jasmine stood silently, unsure of what to do with the wave of admiration crashing toward her. She hadn't done it for this. She hadn't done it for likes, or tips, or praise. She'd done it for herself, for her mother, for every time she was told to know her place. And now she had redefined exactly where her place was. She took a small step back, humbled but proud. Meanwhile, at the back of the room, Preston Maxwell was frozen in his seat. The smugness that had defined his every move just moments ago had drained from his face. His eyes darted across the room, watching as person after person celebrated the very woman he had tried to make into a joke. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. A few people glanced at him, not with laughter or pity, but with disgust. They knew. Everyone knew. This moment didn't happen by accident. It had been forced into being by Preston's arrogance and backfired with poetic perfection. He had set the stage for her downfall, and she had turned it into her coronation. He tried to chuckle, to act amused, as if he were part of it all. But his laughter didn't land. It was dry, hollow, the kind of laugh you use when the punchline has been turned against you. Then someone in the back yelled, "You just witnessed a legend in the making." The room roared again. Phones were up now. Instagram stories. TikToks. Waitress stuns millionaire with piano masterpiece. Captions were already being typed. Jasmine's name was being whispered from table to table, like a secret being passed in reverence. Preston looked down, then away. For the first time in a long time, he had nothing to say. Jasmine gave a small nod to the crowd, her smile calm, peaceful. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need revenge. She had the only thing she ever wanted, to be heard. And tonight, she wasn't just heard. She was remembered. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't bow. She didn't soak in the spotlight like many would have. Instead, She walked back to Preston's table with the same calm composure she'd had when she took his order. Her face was unreadable, but her silence spoke louder than words ever could. She gently laid down the menus, looked him in the eye, and said with cool professionalism, "Your drinks will be right out." The tone was polite, but beneath it, there was something stronger dignity. A kind of grace that made even Preston's most smug friend shift in his seat, unsure where to look. Preston opened his mouth, trying to speak, maybe to apologize, or to offer another snide remark to reclaim some control. But no words came. Not even he could lie his way out of this one. His friends weren't laughing anymore. They looked down at their napkins, awkward, suddenly very interested in the tablecloth. Because the joke hadn't landed. The joke had become legend, and not in the way they intended. By the next morning, the internet had already done what the internet does best. The video, shaky, taken from someone's phone, was everywhere. Unknown waitress shocks fine dining crowd with her piano genius. From server to star, Jasmine Carter leaves millionaire speechless. Watch this woman silence a whole room with just a piano. It was on Instagram Reels, TikTok, Facebook, even LinkedIn. People didn't just share it. They wrote paragraphs about it. The story behind the music, the expression on her face, the injustice turned inspiration. Even those who didn't know her name, yet were calling her things like the Piano Queen, the Quiet Storm, and the waitress with fire in her hands. The restaurant's phone rang nonstop. Reporters, booking agents, talent scouts, music schools that had once rejected Jasmine's scholarship applications were now reaching out, begging her to audition or interview. But Jasmine didn't let it get to her head. She still woke up early every morning to visit her mother. She still picked up shifts at Velvet Ember for a few more days, even though the owner practically begged her to take the rest of the month off and ride the wave of her sudden fame. And then Friday night came. But this time, Jasmine didn't wear a server's apron. She wore a deep emerald gown that shimmered under the restaurant lights, simple and stunning. Her curls flowed freely. She looked like the star everyone had already claimed she was. The piano bench was hers now. There was no dare, no insult, no pressure, just a spotlight, a stage, and a sold-out room. As the lights dimmed and her fingers hovered once again over those ivory keys, a hush fell over the crowd. Front row, near the edge of the stage, sat a familiar face. Preston. No friends, no smirk, just a single man in a tailored suit, clapping quietly with everyone else. He didn't try to talk to her, didn't try to explain. He just sat there alone, applauding. Whether it was guilt, admiration, or shame, Jasmine didn't care anymore. She had nothing left to prove. Her music spoke louder than any insult, and her story had already reached more ears than Preston ever would in his entire lifetime. As the first note rang out, rich and confident, Jasmine smiled. Not at him, not at the crowd, but to herself. Because this time, she wasn't just playing for survival. She was playing as a woman who had taken back her voice, and the world had finally listened. Sometimes, the ones you try to break end up breaking expectations instead. Jasmine didn't just silence a bully. She turned a moment of mockery into a moment of magic. And now, she plays not for money, not for revenge, but because the world finally heard her voice. Musical Keyboard, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring true style stories like this.